300-pound dudes tackling you on a frozen field, the last thing you want to do is stay out there. Believe me, the Rams players were thinking about the jacuzzi at their team hotel, that they find it laughable, but more laughable if they totally disregard the trade whatsoever. This guy has transformed the balance of power in the Eastern Conference. And you could argue the entire defense is going to be absolutely ferocious next year. But if your number one priority is to win a Super Bowl, then J.J. Watt is making a grave mistake. To ride this Chad Henne experiment for an entire game, I might need a whole bottle of Hennessy just to get through that. Guy who's won 8 division titles, who's made 5 AFC championship appearances, who's reached the Super Bowl 3 times and has won 2 Super Bowls for this organization. Aaron Rodgers has only won 1 Super Bowl with Green Bay. Drew Brees has only won 1 Super Bowl with New Orleans. There's only 13 quarterbacks in NFL history that have won multiple Super Bowls, and Big Ben is one of those individuals. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe right here on J&J Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube. I'm Jonah Malkin with you every single Monday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Glad to have you with me on a Monday morning. Got started a couple minutes later, but nothing that we can't overcome. A huge weekend in the NFL and even some spectacular college football plays, perhaps the greatest college football interception that we have ever seen. I'm going to touch on that towards the end of the show, but we start today's show with the Sunday night football matchup, the Kansas City Chiefs and the Baltimore Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens finally, under Lamar Jackson, able to triumph over Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs 36-35. But to me, to be perfectly honest with you, this outcome, the final score doesn't reveal that much to me. Doesn't really reveal anything to me, especially about these two teams. There's nothing that made me come away from this game saying to myself, oh yeah, the Baltimore Ravens are necessarily way better of a football team than the Kansas City Chiefs. Nothing really indicated that to me. If it was not for an Edwards-Helaire fumble late in the game with 1:30 left, Ravens have 1 timeout, the Kansas City Chiefs are going to win this game. So the final score doesn't necessarily reveal anything from that perspective as far as these two matchups. Sure, it's a very quality win for the Baltimore Ravens. It once again reignites the narrative that they can compete for an AFC title. But to be honest, I would take the Kansas City Chiefs probably 8 out of 10 times against the Baltimore Ravens. That's just the reality of the situation for me. But with that being said, I don't really care about what the narrative is surrounding these two teams. What I care about, and the one thing that was really significant to me, was who in particular this was really important for. And that's Lamar Jackson. Because to me, this game was absolutely monumental for the psyche of Lamar Jackson. I don't really care at all about the Ravens and the Chiefs. This isn't about them. Doesn't change anything for me. It doesn't change my position on believing the Chiefs are better than the Ravens. But what it does tell me is we're starting to see some evolution and some more winning intangibles being displayed by a guy in Lamar Jackson, who I absolutely love. Lamar Jackson wasn't great yesterday. He's not better than Patrick Mahomes. He's not a better quarterback. He doesn't have a better arm. He's more inaccurate. And yet all of that doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, you can't teach the type of intangibles that Lamar Jackson possesses. This is a guy who is so easy to root for, because even if you scrutinize his passing, even if you scrutinize his vision down the field, the one thing you can't scrutinize about him or claim that he lacks is heart, toughness, and a competitive spirit, because this guy possesses all competitiveness from start to finish. He wants to win. He cares about winning. And more importantly, he cares more deeply about losing. This is a guy who's constantly trying to improve his craft, to hone his skill set. And whether or not we always see it play out on the gridiron every single week. We know that he's attempting new types of passes. He's trying to get better. He's trying to hold himself more accountable. He's not into the narrative about me versus one individual. Those are all intangible characteristics that you don't teach, that are innate within a player. And so when I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about Lamar Jackson, all of this confidence that he exudes, it was all accentuated by one single play. One single play defined not the matchup between the Chiefs and the Ravens. It defined who Lamar Jackson is. One single play, 4th and 1. The end of the game, 1 minute and 7 seconds left. Chiefs have used up all their timeouts. It's 4th and 1. John Harbaugh turns to Lamar and says, you do what you want. I trust you. What play do you want to go with? And he doesn't even have to hesitate. There isn't any ounce of reservation in Lamar Jackson. He says, we're going for it. Without a shadow of a doubt, we're going for it. Picks up the first down with his legs and wins the ball game for the Baltimore Ravens. Because that's a play right there that not only exudes confidence and displays a boldness and a swag that's needed, but quite frankly, it's only fitting that the team that came against the very team and maybe the only other team that would also go for it in that situation on a 4th and 1 in their own half of the field, and that's the Kansas City Chiefs. Because think about the Kansas City Chiefs, what they did last year in the regular season to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, to the Miami Dolphins. They iced the game on 2 4th down throws last year when it seemed like the more prudent move was to simply punt it away. And that's what we saw from Lamar Jackson, not from John Harbaugh, not from the Baltimore Ravens. He put his trust in Lamar Jackson, and Lamar Jackson did the rest. And again, no one's claiming that Lamar Jackson's better than Patrick Mahomes or that the Ravens are definitively better than the Kansas City Chiefs. But this was significant because for the psyche of Lamar, he can finally put to rest this narrative that he's 0-4 could have been. Now he was 0-3 heading into this contest. Now 1-3 against Mahomes and against the Chiefs. All that is behind them and behind him. And again, I root for players in the NFL that not only do I root for players in the NFL that I enjoy watching, that's without question, but I also root for guys in the NFL that to me truly care about the game. They take it personal when they lose. You can see the visible frustration when they lose. You can see the elation when they're winning. And I know people are going to criticize Lamar for that cartwheel into the end zone, sportsmanship, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. But to the victor goes the spoils. And to me, Lamar Jackson, the one thing that he does share with Patrick Mahomes, and it's the one thing that kind of unites the two of them and makes them both similar in many ways, is their likability. Those two guys are some of the most likable guys in the NFL, and I can get behind that. I can get behind guys that truly care, that possess the skill set. And Lamar Jackson's the most electric football player I think we've ever seen, especially at the quarterback position with his legs. I don't think we've ever seen a dual threat quarterback like that to the degree of him. So, listen, the Ravens had no business winning this game. The Chiefs were the better team. They are the better team. But I don't really care about that. I don't want to focus on that. So, I was thrilled just on a personal level for Lamar Jackson. I was happy to see him finally collect that win on a big Sunday night stage against Patrick Mahomes. And then from an X's and O's standpoint, they did employ some beautiful strategies. They doubled Tyreek, they ran the ball effectively, and they turned to their quarterback to make some quality game-winning plays down the stretch, especially with his legs. And he was able to convert for him, and he was able to pull out the win and eke it out 36-35. So big shout out to Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. And speaking of teams that eked out a win yesterday, the Dallas Cowboys, America's team, went technically on the road to the LA Chargers, although based on the crowd noise and based on watching it from television, it seemed like SoFi Stadium had more Dallas Cowboy fans in the arena. I keep thinking it's an arena because it is. It's almost like an entertainment place that you go. It's huge, a $5 billion facility. It's absolutely sensational, SoFi Stadium. But the stadium was pretty much more filled with Cowboy fans than with Charger fans. And obviously, Greg the Leg Zuerlein, the former LA Ram, interestingly enough, kicked the game-winning 56-yard field goal to down the Chargers 20-17. And obviously this was as time expired as well. But to me, this was the first time in a long time that the Dallas Cowboys did one thing particularly well. And I think this was perhaps the biggest takeaway from this game more than anything, is they recaptured their sense of identity. For the first time in years, the Dallas Cowboys finally were able to regain their sense of identity and truly understand who they are, what they were doing well, and that is with their offensive line. Their offensive line, for the first time in 3 years, looked like an offensive line that was holding up when the Cowboys went 13-3 a couple years ago. Like the offensive line when DeMarco Murray was the leading rusher in the NFL in 2014. Like the offensive line that helped lead and make Ezekiel Elliott the NFL's leading rusher in 2016, in 2018. I'm not saying that this Dallas Cowboys team is a Super Bowl contender, but I think that so often what's lacking from teams is a true sense of identity. And for the last couple years, the Cowboys were kind of spiraling as far as what is their identity. Are we a Dak Prescott heavy team? Are we now an Andy Dalton? Are we Ezekiel Elliott? Well, Ezekiel Elliott looks to be diminishing. What type of team are we? Is this Kellen Moore? Is this Mike McCarthy? And finally, for the first time, they were able to assess themselves and recapture what made them good and what made them peak in recent years. And that was all sparked, again, by that offensive line. All these shortcomings from previous years, finally, they have an answer. They were healthy. Tyron Smith was an impenetrable wall on the left tackle side. Connor Williams, Tyler Biadasz. Zach Martin was back healthy, finally, who missed the opener against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And so that's what was the most important thing for the Dallas Cowboys, is they reverted back to what's made them so successful. And that's been developing an offensive attack around a great offensive line. And from the offensive line, you pound the rock, not relying on a pass-heavy attack, not relying too much on Dak, but getting great contributions and productions from your run game, whose lanes are created by the offensive line. That's how this team succeeds. That's how they did succeed. That's how they're going to succeed now. That's how they'll need to succeed in the future. And again, in recent memory, their biggest strength was the offensive line. It wasn't just like, well, we have to pick a strength, let's just go with an offensive line. No, that's what the Cowboys were known for. They were known for having this impenetrable 5-person wall that opened up gaping holes for the running backs to gash defenses. That's what they were known for. And yesterday it came to fruition. Tony Pollard, first of all, looked like the better running back than Ezekiel Elliott. And that's not hyperbolic at all. He had 13 carries, 109 yards, 8.5 yards per carry to go with a touchdown. Zeke was still productive, 16 for 71 yards and a touchdown, but didn't have the same explosiveness, didn't have the same pop as Tony Pollard did yesterday. So I guess the one silver lining is the Cowboys now have 2 legitimate running backs, although one you're paying 5 years, $90 million for, basically $16 million a year. The other one, I don't even know what Tony Pollard is making, but I know it's substantially less than that. So that's super important for the Cowboys. That, again, was kind of a chicken with its head cut off. Mike McCarthy doesn't really know what he's doing. Even claimed that he mismanaged the clock situation towards the end of the game. No one needs to hear that. That is, you're a head football coach of an NFL team. You got 2 timeouts, 30 seconds left. I don't even want to touch on that excuse. You're fortunate to have come out and have won the game. But the thing that was impressive, then that's when they turned to Dak. Once the run game was established, once the offensive line was doing its part, Dak was 6 for 10, or the Cowboys rather were 6 for 10 on third downs. They had fewer turnovers. They forced more takeaways. And again, only turned to Dak on a couple key plays down the stretch. This offense was primarily run heavy. It was about 50% pass, 50% run. In fact, the Cowboys had 103 more rushing yards than the Chargers, which is a great game plan for this team. And what's probably a more salient point is the fact that this is the first time since 2018 that the Cowboys have won a game when they've scored under 30 points. Think about that. This is the first time since 2018 that the Cowboys have been able to pull out a win without scoring 30-plus points. All of 2019, all of 2020, every single one of their games, they had to score over 30. They couldn't rely on the defense. The defense played a lot better, came away with 2 big interceptions late on Justin Herbert. Now, granted, the Chargers were marching down the field multiple times, had 2 big possessions all the way near the goal line. They couldn't convert, but I think some of the credit has to be aimed at the direction of the Dallas Cowboys defense. So, again, with the exception of one bad throw from Dak, he was efficient, 23 of 27. The defense played well, forced turnovers. Their offensive line regained its form. The running game started to develop again and seems to be percolating a little bit in the right direction. And so I think that, listen, this is a really good win for a Dallas Cowboys team that had to go technically, yes, on the road and knock off a really kind of ascending Chargers team with a lot of talent. Sante Samuel, Derwin James, this is a really good secondary too for the Chargers. So I think this was a really impressive win. All around, very quality win. And it was the 11th time in Dak's career that he's delivered a comeback win when either tied or trailing in the fourth quarter. So he's a leader, but they didn't rely on him or prioritize the passing game over the run game. And I think that has to be the recipe for success moving forward. Because when they called on Dak late, that's when he delivered. They didn't ask him to deliver throughout the entire game. They said, okay, give us one really quality drive down the stretch. He goes 5 for 5, 35 yards, hits Amari Cooper for 12 yards on a critical third down, and essentially sets up Greg Zuerlein to kick the game-winning field goal. And that's it. And so for me, this just felt like a Cowboys game. This felt like just big Texas, rugged, Western-style movie shootout type of feel. Just kind of felt like a Western film that comes down to the end and it comes to a shootout, although this was a lower scoring shootout. That was kind of the vibe and the style that I took away from this game. So big quality win for the Cowboys. They level up their record at 1-1 before they begin to face NFC East competition. So shout out to them and Greg the Leg. Big time win. Big time win on the road. Speaking of a big time win on the road, the other Los Angeles team that played yesterday, the LA Rams, traveled to the Indianapolis Colts. Carson Wentz, and they beat the Colts 27-24. And now that 2 weeks are essentially through the books, yes, the Green Bay Packers and the Detroit Lions are playing tonight, but both of those two teams lost their opening games of the year. So the Rams now have joined a group of only 6 other teams, so 7 including them, that have remained undefeated through the first 2 weeks. We got the Raiders, the surprise Raiders, Derek Carr looking great. John Gruden has his team rolling early on in the season, which we've seen multiple times, so I'm not going to overreact to that. The Broncos are still undefeated. The Buccaneers, the Panthers, and then two other teams from the Rams' own division, the 49ers and the Seahawks are the only other teams that are undefeated so far through the first 2 weeks. But this is a really big win for the Rams for several reasons. First of all, this was the first game of a huge 4-game stretch for them. At the Colts, versus the Buccaneers next week at home, versus the Cardinals, at the Seattle Seahawks. So this was a 4-game stretch that they could have easily lost 3 of 4, perhaps fell all 4 games. On the flip side, easily capable of winning all 4 of those games. So this was the very first hurdle that they had to overcome. First game of this brief kind of 4-game stretch on the road at Indianapolis, you collect a big-time win. And I think the fact that this team was coming off such an emotional high after you usher in the Matt Stafford era with an emphatic win at home against the Chicago Bears, opening weekend of the NFL season, the first game at SoFi Stadium, you win in a major emphatic fashion. So you're riding this emotional high. And I think that one thing that can kind of shake a team's confidence a little bit is after you come off an emotionally charged win, you have a fall off losing in a close manner on the road. I think that could have potentially shaken their confidence a little bit had they lost this game, even though it wasn't a pretty game, even though they didn't play well, and there would be certainly lots of tape to look at and see improvements. But at the same time, I think that it could have shaken their confidence a little bit had they not been able to prevail. So the fact that they were able to maintain this winning streak, maintain that sense of confidence with Matt Stafford, I think is really important. The second thing is, this is a really talented Colts team. This is a Colts team that I've been extremely high on throughout the offseason. This was a team that I was extremely bullish about, and I'm not going to touch on them too much, but they're loaded defensively, and I think that with the right quarterback, this is an AFC championship caliber type of team, a Super Bowl contending team. Now, it's a lot is still to be said about whether or not Carson Wentz is the guy. It's certainly a dire outlook so far. I'm not going to make any big proclamations about them just yet, but their roster from top to bottom is extremely talented. So this is just a quality win, period, going up against this Colts defense and this really deep and well-coached, disciplined team. That's 2. Number 3 is this is the first time that Matt Stafford has trailed in the fourth quarter with the Rams. And I think that it's great that early on in the season, in the second game of the year, they get to experience some of this adversity, getting a chance to trail with a new quarterback, getting a sense to see him lead them from behind and ultimately prevail with a road win. Because when we think about Matthew Stafford, sure, he was with the Detroit Lions, but the thing about him is he was known for actually coming back and beating teams. He had 29 wins as a quarterback when trailing in the fourth quarter with the Detroit Lions, but all of that was with Detroit. None of that was with the Rams. And so this was the first opportunity for the Rams to be able to entrust Matt Stafford, to put their trust in him and say, go finish this game for us. And there wasn't any sense of doubt. There wasn't any sense of kind of not necessarily intrigue, but more so lack of confidence in his ability to deliver, like sometimes was the case with Jared Goff. If the Rams were trailing the fourth quarter with Jared Goff, sometimes we'd have our question marks. Can he lead us? That was always the question. And so Rams are trailing 21-17 after the botched punt, and he leads them down a beautiful four-play, 70-yard touchdown drive. Then they take the lead 24-21. Colts come back, tied up 24. And with 7:22 left, he leads them down again 11-play, 5-minute drive to set up the game-winning field goal. So the NFL is so much about the fine details. In fact, the majority of NFL games are separated by 3 points or less. Normally 3 points is all that's needed, is the only margin. So what that comes down to is execution and trust in your players. Trust in your players to be able to execute down the stretch. That's what it comes down to. That's exactly what it comes down to. And now Stafford has 30 wins, which is the most by any starting quarterback since he joined the NFL, since he entered the NFL in 2009 when trailing in the fourth quarter. It's kind of hard. It's kind of unfathomable that Matthew Stafford would be the guy to be holding this type of record, but that is the fact. That's the reality. And the other reality is it was no secret that Sean McVay and the Rams didn't fully embrace Jared Goff the last couple of years. They didn't fully trust him. And you could see how much faith and how much Sean McVay and the Rams have embraced Matthew Stafford. This entire team raves about him. Not that the team had anything negative to say about Jared Goff. I don't want to disparage him or discredit him for the major accomplishments that he had with the Rams, because it's still early. He did lead them to a Super Bowl, but you can see how much this team really enjoys playing with Matt Stafford, how many more plays they can run. And then fourth is, listen, this is an auspicious start. This is a great start for a team that has Super Bowl aspirations. And when you think about a lot of the teams that have won, the majority of the teams that have won the Super Bowl, obviously the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were a little bit of an exception and an anomaly last year. But normally the teams that are winning the Super Bowl, at least competing for Super Bowls, they're the teams that are able to pull out these narrow victories. These are the teams that are able to prevail, are able to triumph in close games, just able to execute a little bit better, get a little bit of a fortuitous call or a fortunate play. Something goes their way, and that's typically what puts them over the edge. They just have a little bit more of good fortune on their side during the season. And, the Rams didn't play particularly well. It wasn't a great game, but they made enough plays when they had to. And that's something that I think is really important that championship caliber teams need to possess, being able to execute down the stretch. Now, obviously, the big test is going to be next week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Defending Super Bowl champs coming to town. That's the true barometer. That's the true measuring stick of where this team is at. And quite frankly, where both of those teams are at, because that is viewed as a potential NFC championship preview between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the LA Rams. So that's going to be a fantastic matchup. And we'll learn a lot more and be able to further assess. In fact, after next week is when I'll reveal my first true top 10 rankings. I wanted to specifically wait till about 3 weeks into the season. I feel like 2 weeks is a little too early. And so another huge test for them coming up, but a quality win to be able to start off this stretch at 2-0. Buys yourself a little bit more wiggle room in case you need to lose a game. That's for the Rams. Now, for the Colts, listen, I'm pretty concerned about the Indianapolis Colts. Not only because Carson Wentz left the game for the final 2 series with an apparent ankle injury. They are currently testing, doing lots of tests right now. They're not sure what the diagnosis is at the moment, but he seemed to have rolled his ankle pretty badly. That's what he said. That's what the coaching staff said. So that's not a good sign for, again, a team that can't afford for him to miss several weeks, especially early on in the season, because their schedule, I just highlighted the Rams schedule. The Colts have probably had the hardest first 5-game slate of any team in the NFL. They opened up at versus Seattle at home, versus the Rams at home. Yes, those were 2 home games, but those are 2 playoff teams from a year ago. And then after that, they've got to go to the Titans. They begin a 3-game road trip to the Titans, who just beat the Seahawks on the road in overtime 33-30. Then they go to Miami, who listen, maybe that'll be the one break that they get, given the fact that Tua might not be playing, but the defense is still good. But that's not going to be a walk in the park for them. And then they go at the Ravens, who just beat the Chiefs. So it's not inconceivable that the Colts could start off the year potentially 0-5, and yet still have a chance potentially if they can rattle off 10 or 11 straight games, or 11 of 12. But that's a tall order. So that's really concerning right now if you're the Indianapolis Colts, because they could totally start off the year 0-5. Not going to lie, that could totally happen. Johnny Riff. Wentz is so bad. Oh my goodness. Well, the thing is, it's not that you're completely wrong. I do think there were some things that he did well. I thought there were certain throws that he was making. I do like the way that he plays under Frank Reich. I don't think that it was entirely his fault down the stretch that they lost. It wasn't his fault. Jacob Eason threw a terrible pick. Now, I was happy to see it as a Rams fan. But with that being said, am I totally convinced that Carson Wentz has kind of returned to that MVP style and that MVP level from 2017? I'm not convinced of that either. The jury is still out on him, so I'm not entirely positive about him. And finally, I want to transition to the Chicago Bears. So Chicago Bears faced off against the Cincinnati Bengals. Yesterday, Andy Dalton got the second start of the young season for the Chicago Bears. Unfortunately, had to leave due to an apparent knee injury towards the end of the second quarter. That's when Justin Fields took over and eventually led the Bears to their first win of the season, 20-17 over the Cincinnati Bengals. The injury occurred, I guess, within the final 2 minutes, or around the 2-minute mark of the second quarter. That's when Justin Fields took over, had the final series of the first half, and then played the entire second half. So let me first say this. I genuinely like Andy Dalton, and I hope that he can recover. I hope that he can get back to full strength and that he has a speedy recovery, because it is a shame from a personal standpoint to see a guy who started his career with the Cincinnati Bengals not be able to see this game finish and play out with him starting. Because this is a guy who, again, I'm sure the emotions were extremely high for him returning to Cincinnati. Yes, he returned to the Bengals with the Dallas Cowboys last year. In fact, they actually won 30-7. Joe Burrow wasn't playing at the time. But this was a guy who, of course, was drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals in the second round, 35th overall in 2011. And so there's a lot of history there. That was the team he began his first 9 years in the NFL with the Bengals. So I'd understand from a narrative, from a storyline perspective, kind of heartwarming it would have been, how touching it would have been for him to be able to pull out a win against his former team. There's no question about that. But with that being said, the Andy Dalton injury is probably the best thing that could have ever happened for the Chicago Bears. Absolutely, without, hands down, is the best thing that could have happened to the Chicago Bears, because finally, this is the excuse that they've been dreaming of and clamoring for to officially start Justin Fields. Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace were reticent to do it. They did not want to do it. They were trying to employ this more patient approach, this more patient strategy. I absolutely despised it. And now they finally have the excuse that they've been salivating for, to just say, well, my hands are tied behind my back. There's no one else. There's no other backup. We got to start him. And so they inserted him in the second half. Now, I will say, if they all of a sudden throw Nick Foles out there, I'm going to have a heart attack next week. If they go on some crazy pivot and insert Nick Foles, I'm going to lose my mind and scream a bunch of expletives that I'm not allowed to for FCC purposes on this show. And it's not even on FCC, but I just try to refrain from using as many expletives as I can. But I would if Nick Foles was inserted over Justin Fields. But the thing is this, Justin Fields, I'm not going to claim he was great yesterday. You look at the stats, not enamored, 6-13, let's see, 60 yards, an interception, 10 rushes for 30 yards, a lost fumble. He wasn't great. The stats weren't great. But let's not focus on the stats, because there were two big things that happened once Justin Fields was inserted into the game. And these are the two main reasons why I felt that it was absolutely imperative the Chicago Bears start Justin Fields. Did you see? This is the first big point. Did you see how inspired defense played once Justin Fields was inserted into the starting lineup? They were like, they were a group that felt like they were almost like caged and emotionally kind of locked into a cocoon, then finally felt like they could emerge for the first time into butterflies. And it's, it's like they pupated from, the eggs hatching to the pupa, and they turned from a caterpillar to a butterfly. They just said, the hell with this, we're emerging, we're flying. And so this defense was hands down so much better, light years better, once Justin Fields was in the game. And it's not a surprise, because a lot of times a quarterback, especially a young quarterback, can have a profound impact on the rest of the team. It can permeate through the rest of the roster. And this team finally looked again like the elite NFL defense that we've known them to be. They had 4 turnovers. They forced 4 turnovers, rather. 3 interceptions. Roquan Smith had a pick 6. They forced a fumble. They sacked Joe Burrow 3 times. And that's all in the second half. All when Justin Fields was, without question, the designated starter, at least for the second half. And those were that was the first main thing that happened, is that he kind of unlocked the defense once again. So it was a defense that finally felt like they could play at full strength and not just overextend themselves because they know they'd have to be out there on the field again in the next couple minutes. No, this was a team that knew, hey, we can give it our all right now. We can go all out right now, and know that our quarterback isn't going to kind of screw us from behind a second later and send us and force us to trot back out onto the field. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, at the end of the day, who won the game? At the end of the day, the Chicago Bears won the game. Was it pretty? No. But that's what happens when you have a starting quarterback that infuses this confidence in the rest of the team. And again, I'm not going to necessarily say that the Chicago Bears won because of Justin Fields' play. I can't claim that. The stats don't really support that. I'm not going to make that proclamation. But what I can say is that his presence rallied this group and inspired this group to play at a level that we hadn't seen from them in several years, is what it felt like, to be honest with you. And so I think that his impact was that his presence just had a profound impact on the spirit of the team. The team finally kind of reclaimed that joy, that delight, that genuine love and affection for the sport that they play. And that's immeasurable. He possesses these winning intangibles. I talked about winning intangibles with Lamar. And sometimes a quarterback just has this je ne sais quoi you can't really explain. They possess these traits that are inexplainable. You can't rationalize it, but you know that it's there. And listen, I believe Justin Fields is going to be a great quarterback. Do I know that for sure? No, I can't say that I know that for sure. But I believe it, and I think more importantly, the players believe it. The coaches, reluctantly, I think will believe it. He's going to save Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace's jobs. That man individual, Justin Fields, will save Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace's jobs. It's going to happen. It's absolutely going to happen. And now there's no way you can go back. And this is the beautiful thing, and this is the great thing for Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace, is now there's no way you can go back to Andy Dalton even if he heals up. There's no way, because if you do that, you're going to inflict psychological trauma on a kid who you just gave the ball to. You can't give the kid the keys to a Lamborghini and tell him to drive, and then 30 minutes later, take back the keys, sell the car, and go buy yourself a Honda Odyssey again to be more safe and conservative. You can't do that. You absolutely can't do that. Because you're going to totally diminish all the confidence of Justin Fields. Now, if you take away the starting job from him and then return it to Andy Dalton or Nick Foles, whomever, because now you've inflicted psychological wounds and trauma that I don't know that he can recover from. Not all young quarterbacks can. So that's why I think this is a great situation, because now the Chicago Bears are kind of hamstrung. They have to start him moving forward. And I think that that's a great thing. And now they're going to press forward. They're going to usher in this new Justin Fields era. And ultimately, I truly believe that he gives the Bears a better chance to win, and they're going to be much more competitive, and they're going to win more games. And so I think it's going to be a win for everyone. Again, I don't take pride or take any pleasure in Andy Dalton getting injured. Let me make sure that I clarify that. I'm not happy to see that he's injured. I don't want to see him injured. But I do think that two things can be true. And I think that it is a blessing in disguise and that there is a silver lining. And the silver lining is that, well, now you finally have the excuse that you've been clamoring for to start this new kid. That's what I think. Final topic of the day. This one is a special one. This one is a real special one. I've got some incredible Malkins moments this week. Boy, are there some good Malkins moments this week. There's some really special ones here. So, first of all, with college football, Trayvon Henderson, the running back for Ohio State. Ohio State played Tulsa. They beat Tulsa 41-20 over the weekend. There weren't many highlight-worthy plays from that contest, but Trayvon Henderson was absolutely sensational. 24 carries, 277 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Kind of the new running back for this team behind Trey Sermon, who was with the group last year. Master Teague was with this group last year, and Trayvon Henderson has kind of emerged as the main bull horse now. And that was just an extremely impressive performance. Again, I don't really care who you're going up against. 277 yards on 24 carries, 3 touchdowns, sensational performance. Cristiano Ronaldo, who I don't know, maybe he's 38. I'm not exactly sure what age he is. He just signed a 2-year contract to play for his former squad, Manchester United, and he has scored 4 goals through the first 3 games of the English Premier League so far this year at 38. He's been a revelation, not because this isn't something that we've expected to see from him, but given his age, it's not necessarily something that we would expect to see from him at this point in his career. And yet he's been absolutely tearing it up, and it's only fitting, again, that he started and began his career with Manchester United. Now we're seeing it perhaps finish with Manchester United, and he's not just kind of hobbling to the finish line. This is a guy who is playing extremely well at an extremely high level later in his career. Shifting to the NFL for my Malkins moments, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Tom Brady, after his 48-25 win over the Atlanta Falcons, he has now thrown 9 touchdowns through the first 2 games of the season. That's a career high for Tom Brady. 9 touchdowns through the first 2 games of the season. Hard to believe that there are many personal benchmarks that he hasn't reached yet, or that there are some personal feats that he hasn't accomplished. This happens to be one of them. 22 years in the NFL, and this is the first time in his career that through the first 2 games of the season, he's thrown 9 touchdowns. Staying with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Mike Edwards, their safety, had 2 fourth-quarter pick sixes against Matt Ryan and the Atlanta Falcons yesterday. He became the first player since Robert Massey in 2012 to record 2 interceptions that are returned for scores in the fourth quarter of a single game. It was absolutely sensational what he was doing. The fact that it's the same guy against the same quarterback in the same quarter, returned both times for touchdowns. One thing to intercept the guy, then also to return it for touchdowns, absolutely sensational. He's actually the first player since Zach Brown did it with 2 such touchdowns in a single game. And it's just the 3rd time in the Buccaneers franchise history to have a player accomplish that feat. Absolutely sensational. 2 more Malkin's moments. The final one is the best one that I have, no question about it. But first, Travis Kelce, the tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs, became the fastest tight end in NFL history to eclipse the 8,000 receiving yard mark. He's been absolutely a revelation. The 31-year-old got the starting job, began his real career with the Chiefs in 2014. He's been named the starter since 2014. He's played 113 games, and he's coming off a game last week against the Browns, or rather he's coming off a season last year, 105 catches, 1,400 receiving yards, 11 touchdowns in the season. Last week against the Browns, he was sensational. 6 catches, 76 yards, 2 touchdowns in the win over the Browns. Yesterday against the Ravens, even though they lost, the guy was still sensational. 7 catches, 109 yards, a 46-yard receiving touchdown. Was an absolute bully out there. And there are only 8 tight ends ever that have surpassed 8,000 receiving yards. And the guy who actually sits atop that list all time is Tony Gonzalez, who's got the most receiving yards ever, who was a former Kansas City Chief and an Atlanta Falcon with 15,127 career receiving yards. So big shout out to him. Finally, this was probably one of the greatest, if not the greatest, college football interception that I've ever seen. DJ Graham, the cornerback out of Oklahoma, he did something that I'm going to pull up the video now. Hopefully this video can load in a second. But just to put some things into perspective, this is a guy. I'll try and I'm pulling this up for people right now. So just for some context, this is the cornerback, 6 foot, out of Fort Worth, Texas, and this catch that he had against Nebraska, mind you, in a game that was a very low-scoring game, and to be honest, was kind of coming down to the wire. This was a pretty significant play in the game, and the final score was 23-16, and yet this was the guy to make this play. It was absolutely sensational. I'm pulling it up right now. Hopefully we can all see this play. See if we can take a look right here. Every time I watch it, can't get over it. An Odell defensive catch with one hand. They're going to show one more review, and then I'll close this up. Let's see this one more time. Oh, it's loading a little bit. And mind you, by the way, let's see one more time. That was absolutely absurd of a catch. Absolutely absurd of a catch. Charles Woodson has had some good ones with Michigan, but that's an all-time catch right there. That is an all-time catch right there. Oklahoma went on to beat Nebraska. It wasn't pretty, but they got the job done. Wow, that's all the time that I got for today. Finishing a couple minutes early right here on Morning Joe. Thank you so much for joining me on a Monday morning, every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. I'm Jonah Malkin. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube page, Morning Joe with Jonah Malkin. Follow me on social media, on Twitter, at Jonah Malkin, or at morning_Joe_ Instagram, JMalk97. That's the same name for TikTok, Jonah Malkin. All those platforms. Make sure to subscribe, comment, like those pages. And as always, have a lovely rest of your morning.